Hello, and welcome to Sobercast. We provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in a podcast format. We are an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into the virtual basket. Also, if you're a member of NA or have friends that are, please tell them about our other podcast, NAPOD. NAPOD features NA speakers and workshops in the same format as Sobercast. We upload a new speaker every day, and it's easy to subscribe by searching for NAPOD, N-A-P-O-D, all one word, on any podcast player app, or go to napod.xyz if you'd like to listen online. Hope you enjoy the podcast and have a great day.
Everything that I'm going to present here, insofar as my best knowledge is concerned, is out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that is not, I will tell you this is my opinion. Everything that I say is fact. It is not opinion. And it is all backed by evidence. And we've been doing this deal now for about 10 years in various locations around the United States, so it's fairly well crafted. I'm going to start out by telling you this is your workshop. If you have any question at any time, please raise your hand. This is audience participation. There will be feedback. We will have a break. This usually goes 2 to 2.5 hours. You will not even realize that length of time has passed, I promise you. We will have a break, and at the break, we're going to pass out some little papers to have you put down questions, and then at the end we'll have a kind of an ask-it basket thing for those that are too intimidated to put up their hand. So, does anybody have any question before we start? Okay. I'm going to go through the steps, all 12 steps this morning of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. When the first reference you might want to make note of is that our steps came from the Oxford group. Those first 6 steps of the Oxford group are outlined in our big book on page 292. And if you read that, you will see that Bill, when he wrote the 12 steps, really didn't change a whole lot. He just modified. And he added to and made it really very more complete and easier to handle. The first 2 steps, first of all, let me start over a little bit. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in order to thoroughly understand it, we kind of have to get behind Bill's thinking and see really how his mind works. And his mind was, believe me, I have studied this book for 27 years, and his mind was not an easy thing to unravel. He was an extremely talented person. And he did a lot of in-depth thinking. A great deal of this book was God-driven. In his own writings, he says that when he put together the 12 steps, the pen virtually flew across the paper. He was unaware of what he was writing. He tells us, the way he's put this book together is that he tells us a little bit about what's going to happen, and then he tells us how to make it happen, and then he gives us a whole bunch of promises, 182 of them, in the first 164 pages of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He gives us 182 promises that come true, are coming true, and will come true as a result of our work. I believe it's the greatest gift that God has given to mankind in over 2,000 years. The biggest problem most people have with this is that they read what is going to happen and think they have to do something. For instance, in step 2, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves would restore our sanity. And almost everyone without exceptions think they have to do something about that. And so they start busily trying to find a higher power in step 2, and wasting a great deal of time and getting terribly frustrated when it's absolutely unnecessary to do anything. In fact, I don't know how you can really sit at a table and come to believe. It's an experiential deal. It's like learning how, this whole program is like learning how to fly. And I gotta promise you, there is no way that you can experience an 8-point roll unless you just turn it over to God and crank the stick. But you have to have a whole lot of instruction and a whole lot of practice before you can do that. And who cares about step 2 anyway? Why? Because at the bottom of page 85 it says, sanity having now been restored. Oh, wow, what happened? And so, all of a sudden, there it is, as a result of all of the work between step 2 and page 85. So this is what happens in the book. Bill put this book together very early on in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous in an attempt to carry the message to those that were unable to get it verbally. I have spoken across the United States and Canada, and it has been my incredible privilege to share the boards with people like Hector last night, and like Cliff, and Redmond that's going to talk later. And I have experienced sharing the podium with the people that I know have become the masters of this program. And along the way, why, I've learned a great deal. When I was speaking in Memphis, Tennessee, I went to the archives and I saw a letter that Lois had written saying, to Memphis, Tennessee, in answer to a cry for help, we are desperately trying to get a hold of another couple in Kansas City, Missouri that may be able to help you form a group. That's how scattered it was. So Bill tried to put together a book by which people could obtain and maintain their sobriety without contact with another human being. Unknown to most people, there are approximately 2,000 members of Alcoholics Anonymous that are sober today that have never been to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. They're members of a group we call the Loners. They are on the freighters pawing the oceans. They are on the offshore oil rigs. They are in the Northwest Woods 300 miles from a meeting. There is no way they can get to a meeting. And they live their lives in serene contemplation of a power greater than themselves, sober for the first time in their lives as a result of a magic book called Alcoholics Anonymous. So, this is kind of a little bit of the background. The first step is simply a description of what happened in the original 12-step calls when a person cried out for help and someone came to carry the message. That cry came for only 2 reasons. One, that this person had admitted to their innermost self that they were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery, and that's a quote from Chapter 3. We learned experientially. Academic learning is meaningless until it is put into action, and then it becomes wisdom. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look back on your life and realize it's become a bit unmanageable. All of this writing about the steps, the first step, and all this stuff comes from treatment centers. And it becomes so complicated that nobody is getting into the work. They are spending most of their lives, unfortunately, in steps 1, 2, and 3, which means they're getting ready to start to commence to begin, and they haven't done anything. I wish everybody would approach getting their driver's license by using step 1, 2, and 3. I would have all the highways to myself. Think about it. You would wake up one morning and you would say, I know, somewhere inside here I admit there's really a driver and my life is unmanageable without a license. And then you'd come to believe that maybe a power greater than yourself called the Department of Motor Vehicles could restore you to sanity in this area. And then by God you'd make a decision to go down there and turn your will and your life, your thinking, your actions over to them by taking the little test there, which is kind of the 4th step. But don't go down there. Just make the decision every morning. Don't go down there and write out that little test, which is kind of the 4th step, and then, of course, you haven't written it out, so you can't share it with them, which is the 5th step, and you're not going to go down there and do it anyway, so the 6th and 7th step is useless. But every morning you're going to do step 1, 2, and 3 and keep taking the bus for the rest of your life. Step 2, as I said, is a process of becoming and occurs during the next few steps. It occurs during steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, and it's promised. And the answer again is at the bottom of page 84, I believe, 85. So step 1 and 2 were a description of what happened when this alcoholic that cried for help was called on by another one, and for the first time in his life, he experienced another heart talking directly across to him in the language of love of Alcoholics Anonymous, not talking down to or up to, not telling him what he had to do or should do, but only sharing with this person what he had done himself. And for the first time in this person's life, they realized that here was someone talking to them that was there primarily to save their own life, and very possibly, if they listened and were able to take action, their life could be saved too. And they came to believe that maybe some power greater than themselves might possibly restore them to that kind of honesty. The psychiatric definition for honesty, or for sanity rather, is honesty. The maximum amount of sanity that anyone can acquire at any given point in their life is directly proportional to how honest they are. Why? Because the more I become honest with myself, the less I am able to rationalize my behavior. And rationalization is the invention of a socially acceptable excuse for socially unacceptable behavior, and socially unacceptable behavior is insanity. And it is also directly proportional to how far away they put you if they catch you. So this is one of the reasons that Bill over and over and over emphasizes the word honesty, because this is the basis for sanity. At the end of that portion of Chapter 5 that you hear read at every meeting in California, and a great many meetings now across the United States, Bill again tells us exactly where we are and what we should do. And it says, the chapter of the agnostic, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter of the agnostic, and our stories before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God couldn't would if he were sought. Not found, just sought. The next sentence in the book is the trigger sentence. It says, being convinced of this, we were at step 3. That is the end forever of step 1 and 2. The reason we introduce ourselves as alcoholics, my name is Ted Auerbach, I'm an alcoholic, is to forever reinforce and remind ourselves lest we forget. It has nothing to do with anything else. No work is necessary. Being convinced, we were at step 3. If you are not convinced, you have 2 choices. Number 1 is to go out and get drunk because that's what the book suggests. A good case of the jitters may be worth it to convince us that we can't handle our alcohol. It's a little dangerous to try it that way, but most of the fellowship is doing that today. Our stag, which stands 150 men strong every Tuesday night, last Tuesday a week ago, we had 14 newcomers. 13 of them were retreads. What's this tell you? People are not getting the message. We are not fulfilling our obligation as stewards of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are not shepherding these people. We are not sponsoring them. We are not parenting them. We are not doing our job. The success rate today in Alcoholics Anonymous for 20 years or more of sobriety is 3%. I know because I spoke as the opening night speaker at the Kansas State Convention in the latter part of last year, Kentucky, in February it was, pardon me. There were 5,000 people. They asked for everyone with 20 years or more to stand up. There were 150 of us, 3%. They asked for everybody over 10 years. 250 stood up, 5%. And that's the way it goes. 95% of the people in any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous today will die of alcoholism. And it doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes I wish that everyone in this group had terminal cancer. and then I had a little 12-step program that would put you into permanent and irreversible remission, I would have about 105% participation. There'd be about 5% taking the steps just in case. But this is a disease of denial that tells us that we don't have it. And that's the killer, okay? So, being convinced, we were at step 3. If you're not convinced, there is one other way, and that is to go back to the first 4 chapters, including the doctor's opinion in the beginning, reading it over, because that is designed to convince you of those 3 ideas. Now you're at step 3, turn the page over, grab somebody by the hand because that's suggested, get on your knees and do this step, and the prayer is there on page 63. It's probably a good thing to do it in the shower with all the shades closed and the doors closed, because it doesn't look cool for an alcoholic to be on his knees. However it works, I do it over the phone with people, and it works. The reason the 3rd step prayer will not work as an activity later on in prayer and meditation is because the prayer in step 3 asks God to do everything. And it doesn't work. And we need the 7th-step prayer and the 11th-step prayer if we really want to have something that works. Again, at the top of page 64, Bill tells us exactly where we are and what we must do. And at the top of page 64 it says, though our, and I'm going to contract this into one sentence, it's a whole paragraph. He says, though our decision in step 3 was a vital and necessary one, which means it's kind of important, it would have little lasting effect, which is kind of 0, unless followed at once. Now that's a curious couplet. Most people don't know those 2 words exist in the big book. Most sponsors today have no idea it exists. Let me digress a moment. There are several reasons for this workshop. One is to turn you into the finest sponsor that we can produce. The second is that when we finish here, you people will know more about the big book, sponsorship, and the steps than 95% of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous today. And I promise you that. And the third thing is that you will find a way to practice some principles that maybe you were not quite clear on before, that if done so on a daily basis will ensure that you will never ever have to drink again as long as you live, no matter what. When you start sponsoring people using these steps in the big book, I implore you, please do not hand out this workbook. It is too much for a beginner. Feed it to them in pieces orally, as you will be experienced in doing when we finish this. The tapes without the workbook are useless. The workbook without the tapes are useless, because there is too much information here for anyone to grasp at one sitting. So Rusty is taping this. I implore you to get the tapes, combine it with your workbook, and when you start sponsoring people and you have made a new sponsor to carry this message on, duplicate the workbook. You're free to do that. My name and phone number is on the front of every one of them. Call me if you have any problem. I'm about as anonymous as an explosion in church. At the top of page 64, the word at once means now. And how many people have been told, well, I don't think you're quite ready, or whatever? When it was my great pleasure to speak at Founders Day in Akron, Ohio, I went to Dr. Bob's little house, I went through the archives, and I read how the old-timers used to sponsor people. In 1991, when I shared the podium with Dr. Bob's son, the Al-Anon from Texas, in Hawaii, I asked him, I said, how did your dad sponsor people? And he verified what I had read in the archives. They would come to his little house, and they would go up in the bedroom, and in a very short time in the afternoon, they would leave, and they would be into, not through because we're never through, into steps 9, 10, 11, and 12. On page 292, one of his pigeons or babies describes how Dr. Bob went through the 6 steps of the Oxford group in one afternoon. On page 13 of our big book, Bill Wilson himself describes how he went through all 12 steps lying in his hospital bed, with the exception of the actual writing of the inventory and the actual making the noise of the 9th step. Knocking on the doors, making the amends. This is a very noisy program, and if you are not making noise, you are not doing anything. There is the noise of admission in the 1st step. There is the cry of hope in the 2nd step. There is the prayer of willingness in the 3rd step. There is the noise of the pencil on the paper in the 4th step. There's the noise of the voices in the 5th step. There's the quiet whispers of the prayers in the 6th and 7th steps. There's the noise of the pencil on the paper once again in the 8th step, and the noise of the knocking on the doors in the 9th step to make those amends. There's the noise in the 10th step of writing the inventory every night as it stipulates, when necessary. There's the noise of the silent prayers in step 11. And there's the noise of the God-given gift of one heart talking to another in the 12th step. And I'm telling you now, for me, my opinion, if you're not making a lot of noise, you're really not doing nothing. And I cry for you, because you will never see the 4th dimension as promised in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Karen and I were talking about a friend of mine in Newport Beach that uses an analogy. I don't know how many of you remember the, Debbie, will you stop laughing and giggling back there? This is a real serious thing. I mean, she's been through it, so she's a graduate. But he talks about going to the old 3D movies where if you paid admission, you got a pair of glasses that allowed you to see the movie in 3 dimensions. How many remember those movies? And so when we were young kids, why, we would get into the movie with 1 ticket, and then they would let all the kids in through the emergency exits down by the screen. And then after the movie, why, we'd all discuss the movie. And the kids without the glasses would discuss the movie just like we were, except we knew they didn't have the glasses, and they really didn't see the movie, and they really didn't experience what we've seen. And so check it out. If you're asking somebody to be your sponsor, make sure they've seen that they have the glasses. Make sure they've got the look in their eye that tells you they've experienced the happiness, the joyousness, and the freedom that's promised in this program. So at once we begin the inventory. So now we'll go to the workbook and look at the first page. And this is a description of what the process is according to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. First, make a list of all the people, places, and things. Now, if you'd like to participate in this a little later on, what I would like you to do is, as soon as you get a chance, write down a resentment that you would like to share with the group. I don't want anybody to share anything here on the group level that should be shared in the private fashion of one person talking to another on a sponsorship basis. I have seen relationships destroyed. I have seen marriages ruined because people took 5th steps from the podium. The meeting level is not the place for this kind of thing. In fact, we have to be desperately careful these days of who we're talking to, because we don't know any longer who's in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the meetings that I was in not too long ago, I saw some son of a bitch taking notes, and I turned to him and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm taking a roll of who the judge sent here with court cards to make sure they're here." I said, "I tell you what, you get the hell out of our meeting, don't ever come back and tell that judge we're signing no more court cards." I will not stand for that kind of breach of anonymity, that kind of intrusion in a God-given program called Alcoholics Anonymous. Somebody shared from the podium in another state that he'd committed a murder. someone in that audience shared that with their therapist, and their therapist, bound by the laws of the state, went to the police and reported him, and he went on trial for murder. Be very careful at the meeting level what you share. I have enough information in the 5th steps that I have taken to send people to the electric chair. And they know that their trust is inviolate. We hold in our hands the decisions of life and death. Be desperately careful, because we have been given a gift that very few human beings will ever be given. We have been given a gift to save another human being's life. And when it's all done and finished, it's what we leave behind. It's what we're all about. And how many people can say that they've saved another human being's life? The Jew in their book have a great line. It says, "He who saves one life is as if he saved all mankind." And we have been given this gift. So let's get on with the work so that we can go about God's business and take care of his sheep, as he asked us to. So at once, and we make a list, and then if you'd like to share it, why, we'll have some participation later on. And if you make the 3 lists, the lists of resentments, the list of the things you're afraid of, and the list of the people that you have harmed, then you will have a format for your inventory. Do not start writing first. If you do, you will stall out. I don't know why it is. It's just a human failing. And the old-timers made a disastrous mistake when all of these guides to the inventory started, and they got the 5th step confused with the 4th step. And they read the line, "We go through our lives revealing everything or uncovering everything," whatever it says. And they thought, oh, that's the idea. We have to write an autobiography. And these great, huge, convoluted 150-page inventories started appearing. And then Hazelton got into their act with their guide to the inventory. If I'd seen that questionnaire when I first got sober, I'd have killed myself. So let's follow the simple God-given loving directions in the big book. After you've made your list, then you go back and write a couple of sentences about why you're angry, a couple of sentences about why you're afraid, and a couple of sentences of who you've harmed. Now, as a general rule, to move ahead even faster, I combine the 4th step with the 8th step. Okay, so I have the people make a list of everybody that they've harmed physically, morally, emotionally, socially, financially, and sexually. And we handle it all in 1/5 step. Any questions so far? Does anybody have? Okay, now just to make sure you don't miss anything, on page 2, we got a list of all the resentments. If you've got some you'd like to add, I would like to hear about them so that I can add them to the workbook in the next revision. One thing I did forget is that you should put your name first on that list. Whom did we harm more than ourselves? So please make a note of that. Oh, here it is. On page 3, we have a list of all of the fears. If you can think of another one, please let me know, and we will add it to our list. On page 4, we have some crazy list of that's come up from the old Brentwood workshop and from the seminars I've given or the workshops I've given. If there's anything there that anyone's experienced that would like to talk to me privately, and we'll put it on the list for later. Any questions so far? Now, once we have finished that, and that should not take but a few hours. These lists should only take, how long is it going to take for you to list all your resentments? And if you start getting into a list that's 50 people long, it's all ditto marks. I mean, I really don't think the fact that the third grade teacher put you in the cloakroom caused your alcoholism. So, let's be real. It's what you are angry at now. And then we go back through our lives as these resentments come up in our fifth step, and we begin with the sponsor's coaching to see where we have been wrong. What could have been done differently? Part in this. And then we begin through the fifth step to bring out the character defects, asking the person that's sharing this, can they see their character defects? Where have they been selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, dishonest, fearful, and so forth? And we begin our list that is complete very rapidly of our character defects. As we go through the fifth step, I choose, and this is the way I do a fifth step, I choose to stop at every single item and find a solution, because without a solution, it is useless. Remember that all problems cannot be resolved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the big promise is that if we are willing to resolve them, if possible, through the ninth step, if we are willing to do that, then we will reach a point where we can surrender to these problems and accept the fact that they exist, and then a promise in the big book comes true, and we find we can live happy, joyous, and free with unsolved problems. Okay? Any questions? So the fifth step needs to stop at each individual item. What is necessary here? I resent my father because he beat me. What was my part in it? What did I do to trigger this? Or is he just a sick individual, as the book describes, and we need to pray for him and use the prayer on page 552, which is at the back of the workbook. And you needn't turn to it now. It's not necessary. Need we go and make amends to him? What is necessary here so that we can be free and happy? How are we able to clean up our side of the street? That's what this whole deal is about. And so the fifth step can take quite a while, but all of this can be done in less than one day, I promise you. Because that's how the old-timers did it, and they did it before the books were ever written. And then they wrote this book, and they said, here are the steps we took. They had been taking them for a long time before they built this guide. And then we move into step 6. Immediately we go home, it says. And we take down the book from the shelf. On page 75, there are 10 promises. And we spend an hour going over our work. Is our work thorough? Are we building a structure on sand that's going to cave in? And we have to make sure that it's okay. And this is part of step 6. And, thank you, love. So, can't stand these newcomers that upset everything. And as we look at it, we can look at the 10 promises on page 75, and I'm going to read them because most of you don't have your books, which is too bad, but it's okay. Because on page 75 is the beginning of the whole deal. People ask all the time, where is the spiritual side of the program? And you hear these glib answers, which absolutely make me crazy, when they say, well, the whole program is spiritual. And what they've told you is they don't know the answer. Or you come to them with a problem that's going to kill you, and they look imperiously down their nose and say, well, just turn it over. And you say, how I dare you, ask one of them how to do it. How do you turn it over? And they'll say, well, you just turn it over. Well, I turned it over, and then I took it back, and then I turned it over, and then I took it back, and pretty soon they'll look at you and say, well, you're just not working your program. But they don't have any answers, so they make up one. I lost my place. Okay, so we're going to read the promises on page 75 because this is where the whole deal begins. This is where the spiritual part of the program begins. And we'll just go through it. Once we have taken this step, step 5, withholding nothing, we are delighted. That's the first promise. We can look the world in the eye. 2, we can be alone at perfect peace and ease. 3, our fears fall from us. Now, it doesn't tell you when they're going to fall from us. It was 7 years before my fear of height left me. I was unable to go skiing for the first 7 years that I was sober. I could not climb into a gondola or a chairlift. And then one night, after a lot of inventory and sharing and praying, I was invited to a party up on a high-rise building in Century City, west of Beverly Hills, where I grew up. And the party was in the penthouse. And for some reason, which I know today, I walked outside on the patio, which was on the roof. And all of a sudden, I was moved to do something I had been unable to do all of my life. I went over to the parapet and I looked straight down. And I realized that all of a sudden, all fear of height had been removed. I did not know when it happened. But I wasn't sure. So I have to always test my higher power. So I got up on the parapet and walked around a little bit. And now I suddenly realized I could go skiing again. Not only that, but one of my goals in Alcoholics Anonymous was to go back and get my pilot's license again, which I promptly did shortly after that. And that's another story of freedom and outrageous courage that has given one. I mean, when you get lost with God up there in the fog, you are in real trouble. And this is when you understand faith big time, believe me. So it does not tell us when the fears are going to leave. It just promises that they're going to leave. 12 years on this program, that promise came true for me in every aspect of my life. And I'm a slow learner. I make a promise today that the people that I sponsor through the steps will be more sober at 1 year than I was at 10. My search for this thing has spanned a lot of years, a lot of sharing, a lot of searching. There just didn't seem to be the guides around. Oh, sure, there were the tremendous powerhouses and the spiritual leaders like Chuck Chamberlain. They were around. There were guys like Clancy that were 10 years older than I am. But they really didn't have the formula. And somehow it kept escaping me. And so this is why I'm pretty well at peace with these things today. When I was brand new, I was taken to my first roundup when I was 2 months sober, and it was the Palm Springs Roundup, 5,000 people. And it was the greatest thing that was happening in the United States in Alcoholics Anonymous on an annual basis in those days. And at the end of that Saturday night, when the circuit speaker finished and everyone held hands to say the Lord's Prayer, there was not a dry eye in the house. Certainly not mine. And as we held hands and said the Lord's Prayer, I felt an electricity pass through the crowd, and they made a promise. I said, God, if I can in any way give back what I have received this night, I will do whatever's necessary. And 12 years to the date, I stood before that same roundup, 5,000 people, as the opening night speaker of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 3 minutes into my talk when a wave of love passed over me, and I experienced the greatest peace that I've ever experienced in my life, and I realized that all fear of people, places, and things had been removed from me in that instant, never to be returned for the rest of my life. That has been my experience with fears. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. You will have brushed the face of God. You will have established a conscious contact with a power greater than yourself. All right there on page 75. It's the beginning of the whole deal, and I almost missed it. I almost missed it. So you don't have to worry about any of this God stuff. It just happens as the result of the work, because it's promised. And you don't have to worry about the compulsion to drink. When newcomers first come into this program, we are held in the hand of God in a very, very special place of grace, safe and protected for a short length of time. Most people refer to it as the honeymoon period. We never know how long it's going to last. Some people have protracted that period of dryness for years. Some people are so dry on this program they're a fire hazard. When it ends, you will drink, because that's promised in the big book. It says there will come a time in the life of every alcoholic where there will be no mental defense against taking the first drink. And at that point, no academic knowledge will avail you anything. The book says self-knowledge availed us nothing. And it's at that point that you must have created the spiritual armor that is going to protect you the rest of your life when you are totally unconscious of being in a whiteout because of an emotional turmoil. And believe me, when the emotions take charge, all reason leaves. And so this is the beginning. There are two more promises. It says down further, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. And then at the bottom of the page it says, and we are building an arch through which we will walk, a free person. These 10 promises occur long before the 12 promises that are read on page 83 and 84. And most people have no idea how many promises are in this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so then, after we do that, we turn over to the next page, and at the top are 2 paragraphs, step 6, and then the prayer for step 7 is there. And then it tells us that we must get into more action. And now we are into the amends steps, and the amends steps take us pretty much to the end of the chapter, and I implore you to read the directions before you make amends, because they are quite explicit, and I have to caution you that honesty without compassion is brutality. And if you go to some people in this effort of honest amend-making, you may kill them. Be very careful. It tells us exactly what to do, and I'm not going to spend any time on the amends because the directions are there, and you now know where they are, from 75 to 88. Pardon me. To 84. Now, because you don't have your... Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the workbook, and we'll go to the instincts on page 5. And those are a direct excerpt from the 12 and 12. I do not work much with the 12 and 12. I think primarily it's a fishing trip. There's a lot of academic knowledge in there. There's a lot of incredible information because by the time Bill wrote that, he had had a great deal of experience. But as far as the how-to part of the program, it is very confusing. So I stick with the big book because that's the how-to part, and the 12 and 12 is simply an embellishment. Do not, if you're new, or if you begin sponsoring somebody, do not send them to step studies where they use the 12 and 12. It will be far too confusing. And alcoholics, if they're anything like I am, want to get all the information at one time. And what they do with this information is usually get drunk. So be very carefully and bring these people along very lovingly and gently and slowly. Slowly, that is to say, as far as more information is concerned. As far as the actual work is concerned, bring them along in 1 or 2 days, lest you lose them. I've taken people through these steps over the phone across the United States. The results are exactly the same. Sometimes they're even more amazing. So it'll work. Yes? Question? The question was, when I'm taking somebody through the steps, is it with somebody that has primarily been around a long time or somebody brand new, it makes no difference. I do it exactly the same way. What I do is I blindside them. I say, look, make a list of everything you're angry and call me back. They're on the phone 1 minute. They call me back, they got the list of who they're resentful at. I say, now make a list of everything you're afraid of and call me back. Then I make a list of everybody you've harmed and call me back. Now write a couple of sentences about everybody that you're angry at and call me back. And I'll do that part of the 5th step when they call me back then, on the resentments, because that's one of the most dangerous ones. And we'll take care of the biggest resentments and the biggest hurts first and get them out of the way. And then I'll say, now write a couple of sentences about what you're afraid of and call me back, a couple of sentences about what happened in the 3rd list, and call me back. And before they know it, they're through the inventory, they're through the 5th step, and they don't even realize they've done it. And it is a real painless way, because it's like learning how to fly. Now, you'll hear another thing around here. You'll say, well, the steps are numbered because that's the way you take them in order. I have seen people damn near die because they think they got to finish the 9th step before they can move on. I promise you, you may never finish the 9th step, thank you, for as long as you live. Because the 9th step says, became willing to make amends wherever possible, except when to do so might injure them or others. And don't give me this crap about others or me either. That's a new deal. Others are not you. Huh. You just have to trust me on that. So, the steps are numbered because Bill wanted to impress everybody with the idea that he'd hit on 12. Because 12 happens to be a very spiritual number. 12 disciples and 12 months and 12 spots on the dice and all of that. Huh. So, the 12 is meaningless. There is nothing wrong, believe me, with a brand newcomer coming to a meeting and admitting he's an alcoholic and going home and making amends to his loved ones. It is like flying. When I went to this instructor that I said I'd like to get my pilot's license again, and I walked up to a guy on the apron, and he had a logbook about 2 inches thick, which represented about 10,000 hours in the air. And I said, I'd like to get my license back, but I really want to learn it right this time. The first time I did it, I was drunk. And he said, well, let's go flying. And I said, well, wait a minute. Shouldn't we go to some book study meetings on compass first? And he said, no, it generally points north. And I said, well, we really should go to some discussion meetings on artificial horizon, shouldn't we? He said, no, just keep the blue side up. I said, well, what if the brown side gets up? He said, just let go and let God. Sounded like the program to me. Because the dihedral of the wings is geometrically designed in such a way that the plane will stay upright if I don't screw with it. And we went flying, and in 1 hour, we refamiliarized ourselves with all of the principles of aerodynamics, and we saw once again how the instruments work in concert with the control surfaces, and how the control surfaces react to the slipstream. And I must promise you, if we'd only practiced right rudder, you'd have another speaker here. Because you can't land a plane just using right rudder. And so the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous are the same way. We need to know what the principles are and put them all into action at one time so that the being begins to get sober in all categories. Physically, mentally, morally, socially, emotionally, occupationally, financially, sexually, and spiritually. A going concern once again. And so we move through this very rapidly and we learn what the principles are. And then he said, now Now we will go and practice those principles until you become what you are practicing to become. You are practicing to become a pilot. And one day, I became what I had been practicing for. And I have to tell you, one of the most thrilling moments of my life in Alcoholics Anonymous was when I received my pilot's license in the mail from the Federal Aeronautics Administration. Once again, a licensed pilot. The most thrilling moment in my life was when I realized I had become sober in all aspects of my life. I had become what I was practicing to become. Sober physically, because it's a good idea to stop drinking if you want to work this program. It seems to just work a little better. And so I had become sober physically. And then my mind had begun, what was left of it, to straighten out a little bit. And I began to reorganize the moral fabric of my life so that it fit into my beliefs and my spectrum. I make no judgments on anybody's morality. It is yours and yours alone. If I was doing the fifth step with a pygmy, I want to tell you that I could not make a judgment over his cannibalism. That is his own moral thing. Socially, we begin to interact with society again on a sober basis. Financially, we maybe even get so outrageous as to balance our checkbook and get our bills in order. And as we do this, we begin to build a new sexual fabric to our lives, according to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as all of this is happening, we find that we are growing spiritually and reaching spiritual sobriety, which, as it says on page 75, and as Hector said last night, the doing away with the blockage of the things that keep the spirit within us from rising to the surface. And wasn't he beautiful last night? He is just one of the neatest guys I know. And the more I trudge this road to happy destiny, that's a funny statement. I did not like the word trudge. So all my life, I only wanted to do one thing. I just wanted to step out easy. And, in fact, somebody gave me a card here a couple of weeks ago that I carry now. It just says, step out easy. And so I didn't like the word trudge, because I didn't think Bill put anything in the Big Book that wasn't gentle, loving, and God-given. And there's my card. And so I went to an old unabridged dictionary, much like he must have used when he made the book, 7 inches thick. And I looked up the word trudge, and I found for me a perfect definition. And it's the last promise in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't it? Surely we will meet some of you as we trudge the road to happy destiny. And it said this, trudge, to walk with purpose. And what that means to me, for just me, finding at last, for the first time in my life, I know where I'm going. And I can get there by doing the one thing I always wanted to do, just stepping out easy. And so when the last promise came true for me, it was all done. And a love affair with a deal called Alcoholics Anonymous that started 27 years ago in a little meeting in Beverly Hills has just grown and gotten greater and greater. And if you're true to it and follow the directions, I promise you it'll happen for you too. Why? Because it's promised in the Big Book called Alcoholics Anonymous, a magic book. And so on page 5 we have these emotions, these instincts, and we find in the Big Book that Bill says our biggest problem was instincts run wild. We are just crazy. We take everything so personally. Now, if you'll turn to page 6, this is a diagram of the emotional animal. Now, I usually work with a talking board, but I don't have one, and so we'll have to do this orally. Yes. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, please. Everybody want to take a break? Let's do about 10 minutes, and yeah, this is a good place. Thank you, Betty. Great. It's your meeting. We got to do what you want. Well, I don't know. Is everybody pretty much back? I don't know, hold you up for, I see a lot of some empty seats with workbooks and stuff. So let's start on page 6. Now, instincts, those are just listed. So we're going to see now how these instincts have been running our lives. Okay? When a human being is born, they're born with 4 basic instincts. And if you took a group of kids and put them on a desert island with no peer group, no instruction or anything, why, they would form a social group, a tribe, a clan, something, because we're all social animals. And then they would form or create a stockade or a cave or something for basic security, because we're all born with the instinct for security. And for those of you that saw Blue Lagoon, which was kind of a neat movie, why, without any coaching, sooner or later they would begin to procreate, because we are born with a sexual instinct to procreate. The 4th instinct is the instinct for survival. Now, when one of these instincts is threatened or damaged, we immediately, without any control whatsoever, move into the survival instinct. And the survival instinct is described in the bottom of page 6, and it divides itself into 2 parts, fight or flight. And fight translates into resentments and harms to others, and flight translates into fear. And you have your 3 basic character defects: resentment, fear, and harm to others. As a result of a threat or damage to any portion of the basic instincts. Now, where this comes from originally is Joe and Charlie's workshop as a visual aid to the diagram that's on page 60 in our big book. It's on page 65, where it says, I'm resentful at the cause and affects my. It affects my basic instincts in some sort of fashion. Now, this is the 3rd column of the example that Bill gives us on page 65. And his example is very brief and very complicated to look at and very hard to understand. And it's explained in the narrative as instincts run wild and self-will run riot and all of that thing. But it's still very hard to get attached, to get a handle on. So Joe and Charlie from Little Rock, Arkansas, put it on this basic instincts of life which creates self. Now, here is the key to everyone's problem. All the basic problems of mankind are on this page. Why? Any obsession, please make a note of this, any obsession in any area of the instincts, any obsession in any area of the instincts results in all the other character defects. Any compulsion or obsession in any area of the instincts results in all the other character defects. If we can become impulsive or compulsive about self-esteem, thinking of ourselves first or high or low, we become selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, dishonest, and the whole thing starts. Emotionally and security instinct, if we become emotionally obsessive. And, of course, in the sex instinct, if we become obsessive in that area, we begin to practice all kinds of bizarre behavior. So, an attack on or threat to any of the instincts results in the 3 basic character defects of harm to others, resentments, and fear, and a compulsion or obsession in any area of those instincts results in all of the other character defects. Can you see that, and is there any question? Okay, so our problem then becomes understanding this and bridling it so that it does not occur if possible. We are given, as the book says, we have a set of spiritual tools laid at our feet. Hardly anybody has any idea what those spiritual tools are. And so we're going to look at a few of them. If we turn to the grief curve, God, I hope that's it. Thank you. On page 8, why did I skip page 7? Oh, on page 7, feelings, we just threw that in there so you can better describe what's going on in your life to your sponsor, or to yourself, indeed, if you're writing a 10th step. I feel whatever. And it's a pretty neat list, but that is simply a list that will help you better describe where you are. So that's just in there for make the book look thick. On page 8, and this came to me in meditation one time, the grief curve is pretty standard. You can put anything in there that you want. It's also the curve of recovery, where you first find out that you're an alcoholic and shock sets in. It's a disease of denial, and you begin practicing all of those bizarre behaviors that are outlined in chapter 3. You're angry because you found out that you're alcoholic. You're in fear that you may have to give up drinking. You begin getting guilty from all your past behavior. It all becomes depressing, and suicide is always an option. What came to me in my prayer and meditation was superimposing the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous over the top of the curve. Now, if you'll notice, at the top of the page it says, progression of anger or fear. Any threat or damage to the basic instincts forces the ego into instinctual survival modes of fight or flight and the beginning of the grief curve. And under that it says, but only if we give the power away. And here is the secret. The book says lack of power was our dilemma. Why? Because we give it away so easily. Think about it. The minute the red light comes on behind the car, who has all the power? The minute you come home from work and the wife says, where have you been? And guess who has the power? Okay. The minute she comes home and he says, dinner's not ready, the goddamn bizarre behavior starts, and we give the power away. Lack of power was our dilemma. In step 11 it says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, or power greater than itself. And the power, asking, praying only for His will for us, and the power to carry that out. And so in step 11, we are given all the power back in a different form. It is my position that I never have to give that power away again involuntarily. At the bottom of page 87 is one of the spiritual tools that is probably one of the most powerful ones to keep us protected from giving that power away. And it reads, and this is part of step 11, as we go through the day we pause. And in most of the guys I sponsor, I make them cross that out and put stop. And when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action, we constantly remind ourselves, but that's the trick right there. We pause or stop, asking for the right thought or action. And then it goes on to explain, because Bill does not give us instructions without an explanation. We constantly remind ourselves, and this is a redundant sentence, that we are not running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times, thy will be done. Let me suggest this, that anywhere in the book that it says will or will in life, you replace that with thought and action. In step 3, became willing to turn our thinking and our actions over the care of God. As Hector last night said, he simply echoed what I've been saying for years. If my thinking can become God-directed, then my actions will become God-directed, and my actions are my life. Getting a hold of will in life is far too big for a little guy like me. Thinking and actions is easy to handle. So here again it says, constantly reminding us that we're not running the show, humbly asking him, thy thinking be done. Because step 11 says, on page 84, we consider our plans for the day. We ask God to direct our thinking. When a man finally decides to get his affairs in order, he goes to an attorney and he writes down a whole bunch of stuff about who's going to get what. And then when he dies, they all rush out to the cemetery and bury him real quick, and then they all run over to the attorney to see who he left what to. And the attorney takes out a piece of paper and reads what that man's thinking was on that day. And they call it his will. Okay? So, that tool is an incredible aid to keep us from giving that power away. Now, if we enter the grief curve, then, recognizing that once we're through the shock and denial, in the case of the loss of a loved one or the death of a loved one, a person will stay in shock a long time, maybe several weeks or several months. And they must be gently loved and cared for during this period, and you cannot do anything with them. And then slowly they will move into denial. He can't be gone. She can't be gone. A lady can identify this with us real easy. Anything that you go through in life that affects these instincts, you're going to do this. A lady's ready to go out on a date or out with her husband, and she breaks a fingernail. The whole grief curve, folks. Shock. Denial. This can't be happening. If the son of a bitch didn't put my nail on right, if anybody sees this, I'm going to look like an ass. You know, if I hadn't been in such a rush, it wouldn't have happened. This is depressing. I think I'll kill myself. Oh, well, screw it. I'll put a pink bandage on it anyway, and I'm free. But you have to go through the whole curve. It's incredible. Look at a guy with an antique car that gets a dent in the fender. Now, the curve's not going to be very long, but I promise you it's going to be deep as hell. You know, the distance across the curve is a function of time, and the depth of the curve is a function of emotional involvement. Okay? If it's your kid's car, you probably won't even go through the grief curve. Screw it, he deserved it. He dented mine enough, you know. So no matter what happens, we're going to do this. Now, once we start in the grief curve and we recognize that we're in it, what can we do? We can now apply the God-given magic spiritual tools of the program. We superimpose step 4 as a function of the first part of step 10. I do not care where you are or think you are or somebody has told you are where you are, quote, in the program. If something's bothering you, pick up a goddamn 900-pound pencil, as the cartoon on the front suggests. That cartoon came from my sharing at a meeting one time, and I was telling about my loving sponsor, who's now dead. He was my sponsor for 27 years. And I went to him and I said, now what about this flippant inventory? And he said, well, you're a very important person, Ted, and highly intelligent, and you're going to need some very special tools for your inventory. And he said, the first thing I want you to get is a very large, dull crayon so you won't stab yourself to death. And because you're going to be obviously writing the valedictorian of your career, you should probably get a large roll of toilet paper. That's how big a deal you are. And this friend of mine who was in the audience was making this cartoon, and I still sponsor that friend. And so we use that as the front page. So the magic, there is a magic that occurs between the pencil and the paper, I promise you, that will never, ever, ever happen between the mind and the mouth. There seems to be a spiritual connection between a pencil and a piece of paper. And I have to promise you this. If it were not for a pencil and paper, nothing would have ever happened in this world. Do you realize that? From the first hieroglyphics on the first prehistoric man to the first edifices that he built, under the direction of hand-carved architectural directions carved on stone, nothing would have happened. There would be no Bible. There would be no gorgeous music. There would be no beautiful art. There certainly would be no magic book of Alcoholics Anonymous unless someone had picked up a pencil and paper. And in God's world, who am I to argue with that kind of evidence? So if you are in any problem at all, dumping at a meeting will not help it. Talking about it will not help it. But when you have written about it, something happens. And then when you talk about it, something different happens. And then you are able to take this written thing to God in step 6 and begin to ask Him to help you with it in step 7. And that is how you turn it over, and there is no other way. That is the first half of step 10. Continue to take personal inventory. As long as I'm on step 10, I want you to make a note. When you get to your big book, put a parenthesis around the paragraph on page 84 that says, on 84, this thought brings us to step 10. That one paragraph is step 10. All of the rest of that, on that and the following page, is step 11. For some unknown reason, we kind of got mixed up here. And this is my opinion, but this will simplify this a whole bunch. On page 86, in the middle of step 11, we have the real crux of the directions of step 10. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Where were we resentful, selfish, dishonest? Do we owe an apology, and so forth? This is continuing to take personal inventory in step 10, but it's buried partly in step 11. Step 11 really starts after that on page 86 where it says, on awakening. And I'm going to cover on awakening on the second to the last page of the workbook. Any questions so far? So we write about it. We become willing to share it. We ask God to help us with it, and we ask Him, and we move across the grief curve from denial into admission, and we begin the ladder to freedom, which is very quick, into acceptance, and we stay free on a current basis through the application with a pencil and a paper with step 10, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it, steps 8 and 9. And so in step 10, you have 4 through 9. Once you have done steps 1 through 7, you never have to go back again. You will keep current in step 10, which is 4 through 9, on a daily basis. And keeping current with our feelings is the secret to happiness. Can everyone realize that? If I am current with my feelings, I have to be happy. Why? Because for the first time in my life, I am free of all the guilt, shame, and remorse of the past through the inventory. I am free of all fear, which is always in the future. And that leaves me in the one place I've looked for all my life, to be here with you now in the present, this moment, happy, joyous, and free. That is the formula. It is immutable. There is no escape. Many people say, well, there's many ways of working the program, as there are people in the program. I do not want these people pouring a foundation for my house. They're going to say, there's as many ways to make concrete as there are people making it. Fuck you. And all the houses fall down. There is a formula because there is an exact input and an exact result from all formulas. And it's just as sure as anything in the world. And if you try to modify the formula, you're going to die. If I try to modify the formula of aerodynamics, the plane is going to crash. Every time I land, I have 6 questions I must ask. Am I too fast? Am I too slow? Am I too high? Am I too low? Am I too long? Am I too short? If the answer to any one of those questions is yes, and I try to land that plane, I will die. I will land short of the runway, or I won't have enough rollout for the plane to stop, and I will crash into the barricades. How do I look? I've got to check it all the time. How do I look? Am I happy, joyous, and free? Am I harboring any resentments? Am I doing anything to harm anybody in any way or say anything harmful? And if the answer is yes, I got to pick up that pencil. I got to get rid of it. I got to promptly make amends. I got to stay current with my feelings. Because I found out I'm one of God's kids. And all He ever wanted for me from the very beginning was to be happy, joyous, and free and enjoy being one of His kids before it all got screwed up and harmed somewhere along the way. I don't know how it happened, and I don't know where it went. I just know it's gone through a magic deal called Alcoholics Anonymous. And it can happen for you because it's promised. And so, on page 8, we have the answer to all of our problems through the application of the steps. Do you see that, and are you comfortable with it? It takes some practice, believe me. We don't learn how to fly without some practice. It takes continual attention, continual awareness all the time, lest one of these sneak up on us. And if we get ambushed, no big deal. It's just going to progress a little bit further, and we'll have to do a little bit more writing. On page 9 is the Freedom from Bondage prayer that I told you about. On page 10 is an exercise for getting our goals in order and how to make a list of things. What I suggest is this, and these are my ideas. They're not in the book. But I know this. I know that no captain of any ship ever reached a destination without knowing what the goal was and having it written down and having his course charted. And there's a funny thing about that. I also know that none of those goals or destinations are ever reached in calm seas, because we need fierce winds sometime to sail the vessel to the destination. And it'll be becalmed, and we won't think we're going anywhere. And there'll be raging storms, and we'll think we're going to die. But I tell you one thing. If we wake up every morning, like I do, and we make sure that little ship is in order, and that the hull isn't leaking, and all the sails are sewn up and not torn, and we check our direction and we make sure we're on line, we're going to get there. But frustratingly enough for the alcoholic, we're going to get there in God's time, not ours. But as long as that little boat's in shape every day, as long as we know what our goal and destination is, and as long as we keep doing the footwork to get there, we'll get there. And one day, that pilot's license came in the mail. One day, the fear of height went away, and all those goals came true. And so what you do is make a free-form list. And I don't care how crazy it gets, of all the things that you want and all the things you'd like to see happening in your life. Short-term goals, long-term goals, mid-term goals. When you get them down, why then organize them into 3 lists. The ones you must do, like put gas in the tank tomorrow, and buy your wife a card or a rose, because maybe you haven't done that for a long, long time, or your lady. And then the things that you should do, well, I should fertilize the roses if I'm going to give her one, but it's not real imperative, and it's not real disastrous if you don't do it today, but it should be taken care of real soon, and that goes in column 2. And then the things you'd like to do, and you put those in column 3. And then you take those 3 lists, and you reorganize them again and assign a numerical value. And maybe calling your attorney becomes 1A the next morning, or putting gas in the car, and maybe wanting to get the car polished is number 1 on the should-to list. And maybe getting a yacht, or a successful relationship, or something real neat in your life. Maybe that's what you'd really want to do. Or maybe going back to school, or maybe starting a business. And I don't care how outrageous it seems. Don't ever set any limits. And let me tell you this, if you want a dream to come true, you got to have a dream. And please, don't ever let anyone take your dream away. Because a person without a dream is an empty human being. They just are, and they are so sad. They just don't have any dreams. And they never let that little kid, whose first question is, why, Daddy? Or why, Mommy? They never let that kid ask the question, I wonder what if. I wonder if anybody ever tried. I wonder what would happen if I tried. That one word that's the beginning of all things that happen in the world. I wonder. Because without wonder, and without a goal, and without a dream, nothing in this world would ever happen. As long as you use a pencil and a piece of paper. And write them down and put them where you can see them, on your rear view mirror, and on the mirror in the bathroom, and reorganize them every day. And you'll have a lot of fun. And as they come true, all you'll say is, wow, isn't that nice? Because you see what happens with this is it gets assigned to the most powerful piece of machinery in the world, the subconscious. And the subconscious begins to work on the things that you want to do without you even knowing it, and the things you should do without you even knowing it. And all of a sudden during the day, a little space of time will be provided where you can work on a want to or a should do. And I don't know how it happens, and I don't know why it happens, and I don't really care, because I think knowing why is the booby prize of life. It just doesn't matter unless it can save a life. Then I'd like to know why. But why my knee got destroyed in a skiing accident is absolutely nonsense. It didn't help the pain at all. All I need to know is how the cow got in the mud and let's get him out. I don't care how he got in there. On page 11 we have a daily inventory that's kind of screwed up. I just took this from another one and I really haven't had time to redo it. I've got the grid in my computer now. And what I would do if I were you is maybe copy this and put down the 7 deadly sins in the left column, if you'd like to, out of the 12 and 12, and maybe the character defect, selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, dishonest, or fearful, and put those down on the list. Put the antonyms down on the right side. Make your own little grid if you want to improve on it. Some of these are kind of nonsensical, really. They're okay, and they're problems that we all have. They just aren't out of the big book, or out of the 12 and 12. And I want to tell you that out front. And across the top, we have 31 days to fit every month. And in the little upper left-hand corner, it says, watch for X. And so if one of these ones in the left-hand column rears its head, put an X in the little square. And over on the right-hand side, it says, strive for V. That's victory over one of these character defects. And what I'd like every one of you to end up with is a whole grid full of V's. But the X's will tell you what you got to write about, what you need to share, what you need to ask God for help with. Any question? On the next page, page 12, that top prayer is the 11th step prayer. Most people do not know where it is. It's in the narrative, and everywhere it says we ask God, that's part of the prayer. So we kind of put that together. I think it's got a couple of typos in it, but screw it, he doesn't care about that. Down in the PM is the 10th step prayer. Most people do not know it exists. Any question about that? Moving on now to page 13, which runs against most of your beliefs because this is probably the luckiest page in the workbook. We have put together something that is part my idea, partly out of the big book, and part of my sponsor's idea. And all I can tell you is that the things written on this page work because I have been using them for about 20 years. I did not find them for about the first 7 years that I was dry. My sobriety date, by the way, is April Fool's Day of 1968. And for that I am eternally grateful. The priorities at the top are immutable. If their order is changed, you will feel pain. You will feel pain physically, mentally, morally, emotionally, occupationally, financially, socially, or spiritually. I want you to insert in there, oh, I've got occupationally, never mind, it's done. These are the parts of a person that make up his being. This makes the going concern. If any one of these is out of order, we will feel pain. And you must then write about it and share it and put it back together. Over on the right, you'll see these elements can be used as a guide to set my goals for future, i.e. physical goals, financial goals, and so forth. So they can be used as triggers. Do I want to go back to school this year and do something as far as my mental goals? Do I want to rejoin a church as far as my spiritual goals? So they work together. This whole page is going to end up being in a circle. And I don't know why that is, but I know that everything that's perfect is round. I must put God in my sobriety first. Without this, I cannot maintain my sanity. And without my sanity, I am no good to myself or anyone. That must be number one, and it must stay number one. I must put myself second. And that doesn't mean jumping in line for the coffee or the movie. It means that I must make sure that all of these elements of my being are in order, so that without that I cannot be of any use to my fellows. 3, my job, whatever I do to take care of my obligations, and which also helps me to build and maintain self-respect and dignity. I don't care whether it's volunteer work, sewing at home, or whatever. This is an important part of your being. Any questions? Yes. Really not yet. That's 4, other things in order of their priority. That's correct. It's also the 12th step, which is the last step. It's at the bottom. But sooner or later it gets to the top. But unless these other things are in order, I cannot carry the message. Does not the book say, I cannot give something away that I do not have? These first 3 priorities will make sure that I have something that somebody wants, I promise you, because my being will be in order. My soul with God will be in order, and I will feel okay about myself. One sick person helping another sick person ends up with 2 people in the hospital, usually. The difference between empathy and sympathy is really interesting. Empathy is holding a person in your arms and loving them and letting them cry and telling them they'll be okay. Sympathy is standing on the rail of the deck and puking along with them, and neither one of you are worth a damn. So let's learn to be empathetic. Let's get our own house in order so that we can give away now what we are comfortable with. We are now becoming really adept, knowledgeable, helpful and loving sponsors. Do you see that? Any problem? Each evening, make a list of the things I want to do tomorrow. These are those things on your goal list that are the 1A, B, and C, or A, 1, 2, 3. Why do we do that? Because if I put those things on paper before I go to bed, I don't have to think about them all night. I keep a flashlight, a pencil, and a paper by my bed. And if I wake up with some obtuse idea in my head that I have no control over, I simply write it down, and then my head says, oh crap, he's put it on paper, we might as well sign off. And it's another magic tool. List 10 things that I did today that I feel good about. This is a very, very curious exercise. This is a psychiatric exercise to rebuild self-esteem. Why? Because once again, I am turning over a problem to the most powerful mechanism known to mankind, the subconscious. And if I make a habit out of this, and it takes 14 days to create a habit, and I've proven that to myself, and if I write those things down, then if I let a little old lady in front of me in the checkout line, or I open the door for a guy in a wheelchair coming through a door, or if I just simply move over and let some high-speed outfit go by on the freeway instead of ramming them into the divider rail like I used to, I feel good about that. And then I say to myself, I own that. I clean up my room every morning before I leave, and I make my bed. And as I leave my room, I look back and I say, you know, I'm glad I did that. I feel good about that, and I own it. And some little part inside of me gets cleaned up. And then the subconscious takes over, and it starts to think of things that I got to put on this stupid, pukey list every night. And all of a sudden, my behavior towards you begins to change. Instead of a hateful, resentful human being, I begin to slowly change into a loving, helpful child of God. It's a very, very powerful tool. But, you know, it really won't work unless you do it. And then I go over the events of the day according to that 10-step prayer and according to the directions in the book, keeping current with my feelings. This is the secret of happiness. Each morning, and I don't care necessarily if you get up 1 hour early, but as long as you include these things in your day somewhere, it will work. Exercise for about 20 minutes, spend about 20 minutes reading the big book or something spiritual, and spend about 20 minutes in prayer and meditation. This is step 11 and is best done according to the instruction in the big book. I exercise about 10 minutes and I read for about 45 minutes or 50 minutes and I do prayer and meditation for about 1. That just happens to be the only way I can do it. I use a conversational prayer with my God as I drive around and go about my business during the day. I have God sitting beside me like He's my coach. And if something's going on, I look at Him and I say, Coach, is this what you would have me thinking? Is this what you would have me doing? And all of a sudden inside, I know instinctively what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's going to keep me happy, joyous, and free. So whatever works for you is fine. And there are great books that have been written. There's classes on meditation. And I think that everybody should continue growing. And I don't like it when people talk about the 10th and 11th step as maintenance steps, because maintaining something is boring. That means it just stays the same. I prefer to look at the 10th and 11th step as growth steps. I just want it to get better and better. I'm a greedy guy. I want more and more of the same thing I found with you loving people in a deal called Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, in step 2 it says, go over the list of things that I want to do today according to the list that I made last evening. Why? Because in step 11 on page, where am I? On page 86, it says this. Upon awakening, and I've tried not to put anything in here that is not in accordance with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. How can you have a plan unless it's written down? And so we write down the night before what we want to do, then we go over it and modify it for today, and we show up for the first time in our life with a plan for the day. We got things to do, goals to create, or goals to satisfy, and places to go. This is my plan for the day in accordance to step 11. I'm going to make you a promise that's my very own promise. If you start doing this tonight, and you do these things tomorrow morning, tomorrow, beginning when you finish your prayer and meditation, I will promise you that you will have the best day in sobriety you have ever had in your life, and you don't have to have done any of the other steps to reach this point. You will have the best day of your life if you do the things that are on this page. And to guarantee that, I made a worksheet in the last page of this workbook so that you can fill that out every day. And I suggest you take that last page and make 30 copies of it, one for each day of the month. And every night you fill it out, and every morning you look at it and make sure you've done the stuff. And for the first time in your life, you'll feel a part of a deal called Alcoholics Anonymous because you're immersed in the program. And you got a hold of something that only 3% of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous will ever attain. You'll be riding on the big horse on the outside of the carousel, reaching for that brass ring, and when you grab it, it's going to be gold, because that's the way we do it. Living on the outside, a part of humanity, useful and decent human beings, once again, able to walk down the street with our heads held high and our shoulders back, looking everyone in the eye with no shame, no guilt, no remorse of the future, and no fear of the past. It's all promised, and it can come true for you. Thank you so much for allowing me to present this workshop. And now, with your leave, if you care to, we'll proceed into however long a period you want. It's your deal. You can leave any time you wish. Move into a period of questions and answers if you'd like. So if anyone would like to raise a hand. I guess we didn't get any papers to write on, so. Does anybody have a question? Everyone's thoroughly intimidated. Yes, back there, Rob. I can't hear you. Okay, I'm not sure I heard all of that, but I think the crux of it was as we get to the end of column 3, and we need to figure out what our character defects are. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's two separate lists here there's two separate deals that are written down that we're talking about here. One is the list of the things we want to do tomorrow, the things we have to do and the priorities and all of that stuff. The other thing that we have in writing in front of us is our 10th step. They're two separate deals. With my 10th step, it says that I really need to do that all during the day when something happens. I need to write about it and share it as soon as possible. So it is separate, but it is top priority. You're absolutely right. So that sharing that 10th step with your sponsor may be 1A in your list of priorities. Is that what you mean? Yeah, for the next day, exactly. So, without a little practice and so forth, why it takes some time to really shake all this out. We've covered a tremendous amount of territory here. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Yes. What do you think the question was, he's got a resentment against himself because of the things that he did against his wife and his children while drinking. What do you think would make you feel good? Let me rephrase the question. How does this guilt translate itself? I mean, are you just into self-pity, saying, woe is me, poor me, I beat up my kids and I gave my wife the finger and all the rest of that stuff? Where are we with this? How did your father act to you? How did your father treat you? He treated you good? He was working most of the time, Do you think anything that your father did or said or acted or anything had anything to do with your alcoholism? Okay. Nothing you did has anything to do with the behavior of your child. There's a real academic story about this, and it's a story about two identical twins. And they had identical fathers, and they had identical problems. The problem was that their father was a blown-away, Skid Row alcoholic. One of those twins was a blown-away, Skid Row alcoholic. The other one was an ordained priest in the Catholic Church. Same fathers, same environment, totally diametrically opposed outcome. Your child, how old is he? 17. And how long you been sober? Almost a year. Has he ever blamed you and told you that, what did you do to this kid? Did you beat him unmercifully? What'd you do? Well, let me ask it a little different way. Had you not been drinking, would you have done anything different? No, not probably so. What would you have done different? But you might have. Well, I'll tell you what's happening. Most teenagers, especially one as intelligent as this, is using all of that bullshit against you. He's using it as an excuse for his behavior. And it's unacceptable. See, I don't give a shit what you did. His behavior is unacceptable. And don't you ever blame my character defects for your behavior. No fair. Time out. You see? And they're diabolically intelligent with this. The kids will use this stuff against us until the cows come home. Oh, well, hell, Dad, if you hadn't been drunk all the time, I would have known, not to go to sleep with a grain harrower. It's a lot of self-imposed stuff. As long as today you're walking with God and you're an example of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, all that stuff is going to leave. Because you may be the only copy of the big book that anybody sees. And he's going to see a different dad. And the book and the stories that you hear from the podiums of Alcoholics Anonymous promise over and over and over that behavior will become different. And your wife should read the chapter to the wives and the family afterwards. There will be a long period of healing and reconstruction, it says. The most disappointing thing happened to me that could happen to anybody. 6 years sober, it's a summer, and it is hot. And I can't go to sleep. And I am perspiring, and the perspiration is rolling off of me, and I turn to my then former wife-to-be, and I said, I am really hot, and this bitch said, maybe it's the rubber sheet. And I said, what? I was a fireproof drunk. I used to wet the bed a lot whilst drinking. I was sober 6 years, and it takes a long time to build his faith back, is what I'm saying. You see. It takes a long time to rebuild his faith. I used to wake up periodically with this little yellow fire break around me every morning, So what the trick is here is patience and working together and sharing what's going on. Okay? So, yes.
How would you recommend doing the inventory, doing the 4 columns, and listening to the 5th step, helping someone find out what is wrong or wrong?
Well, the question is, how do you use the 4th column to find out what's wrong and get them to list their character defects? I no longer use the columns. Joe and Charlie are no longer using them. It was kind of nonsensical, really, checking all this stuff off. So what the narrative says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, as we go through this, because the 4th column's in the writing, it's not in the diagram, okay? All right, let's do a little thing. Share a resentment with me. Anything. All right. What part of that did affected you? Let's take instincts for an example. What part of your instincts did that affect? Why did it affect your self-esteem? Why should you be listened to? Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. It's because you should be listened to. Why should anybody listen to you? There it is. Now that's the fourth column right there, and we just did it. You see? So we have to closely do what the book says, closely examine it, go back through it, ask these kind of really embarrassing questions, until we found out right now exactly what our part was in it, what we might have done differently, and had we followed the directions in the book on page 96. Well, no. That would, that's right. Yeah, so, yeah. In almost all cases, the ego is there. That's what the book says, exactly. So that gives us our carrot. It says the ego has to be smashed. Okay, this means that we need more work in that area until it ceases to be an ego problem and it simply becomes a loving challenge to help another human being. I don't care if I look good anymore, obviously. I don't care how important it is anymore. I don't run popularity contests anymore. My business is saving lives. And if you don't want what I have, I took a line I stole from John Calton from Brownwood, Texas. He died a number of years ago. He was sober a long, long time. He was a very accomplished attorney. He was legal advisor and personal confidant to one of the vice presidents of the United States. And John Calton put himself through law school, boxing in the ring as a professional. And he left Portland, Maine, his hometown, and went to Skid Row under an assumed name because of alcoholism. And when he sobered up, he went to Texas. And he was 6'4", and I loved the man. And he used to say this: I will go to hell and back with you if you want this deal. But if you don't want it, you can go to hell all by yourself. It's a program for people that want it and that are willing to do it, not for people that need it. And I have to be sure that I, at all times, keep this admonition on page 96 in mind, which gives me the exact instructions. And it says, do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it is a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with us. And I dare not waste my time lest I miss the opportunity to help another person. And as I slowly try to do these things in the book, as I slowly see the results becoming a part of me, the ego slowly starts to slip away. That part that was blocking me from God. Does that kind of help? Okay. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You get down into those nuts and bolts, and that ego just pops up every damn time. Column 4 is in the narrative. That's what's the problem, because he gives you like 2/3 of the 3/4 of the answer. And Joe and Charlie wrote these columns out in their exercise. Let me look here. The example that he gives is on page 60. 65. Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife made me crazy, and it affected my self-esteem and my sex relations and so forth. Now, the fourth column is over on, starts over on page 65, where it said, we turned back to the list for it held the key. We were prepared to look. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. And this is because we allowed our instincts to get in the way. Okay? We look then on page 67 where the fourth column is, and it says, we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat a sick person this way. We cannot be helpful to people, but at least God will show us how to take kindly and tolerant view of each one. We resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where we've been selfish, self-centered, inconsiderate, dishonest, and so forth. That's the fourth column. Precisely. And then there's a fifth column, and that was what I just did with you, where we get into why that was going on. Why did ego get in the way, you see? Because I need to find the solution, as you just said, or nothing's going to change. So simply delineating the character defects was never enough for me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.